Greetings and welcome to Legacies of Wavryn, Lore of the Endelment. This will be chapter 28 of this reading. When I stood against Father, I felt nothing but hateful and blind rage. I wanted nothing more than to brutally destroy him. Oddly enough, pain from my scars had completely disappeared, along with the scars themselves. My blood-red aura spiked out wildly, nearly 2 feet from my body, with bits of black lightning that sparked around the edges. As my energy continued to flow around me, the blood around my feet was being pushed away, while bits of the blood were raised and thrown aside. When my body changed again, Callius, Grandpa, and Father laughed. Then Father said, "Not bad, kid. Now what?" I quickly jolted over and punched Father hard with my right fist into his face, sending him to the far end of the area and into a large tombstone in the distance. Quickly after that, jolted over to Callius, kicked him with my left foot into his stomach to stun him, then kicked the back of his head with my right foot to knock him out and slam him into the blood-soaked ground. After that, I used Dark Vanish to move over to Grandpa to stand just a foot away directly in front of him, with him just staring at me with a smirk on his face. "Good, Endelment," he said. "Very good. Now, let's see how well you can control it." He pulled his right fist back, then swung it towards me and tried to punch my head. However, just as he swung his fist, I quickly grabbed it with my left hand and clenched it tight, nearly breaking his hand. I then kicked Grandpa with my right foot into his stomach to stun him as well, but after a second of watching him look as if he was choking, I kicked him 2 more times, each time even harder than before. I let go of his right hand and kicked him 1 more time to raise him up a bit, then went into the Vanish state to start rapidly punching and kicking him. While in the Vanish state, I rapidly struck Grandpa for about a minute, then jolted over towards Callius, started rapidly striking him as he tried to stand up from my previous attack. Afterwards, I jolted back into the center of the area where I had once stood, faced out to where I had punched Father, moving out of the Vanish technique and waiting for the 3 of them to recover from my assault. Father walked back over, oddly with someone in his left hand. He was holding them by their shirt's collar, person up so that their knees were just barely off the ground. Father just looked at me with that blank stare of his, as if unscathed from my attack. Father stopped to stand about 14 feet away and said, "Now then, Endelment, let's see what drives you more." Callius vanished over to Father's left side and grabbed the person's collar with his right hand to hold them up, while raising his left hand to aim his palm at the person's upper body. With that, Father said, "You have 2 choices." He raised his right hand to his chest level at his side, forming a sphere of energy to the size of a basketball. He made it out to look like Earth, then continued, "You can either save this entire planet from total destruction, or..." Callius charged a blast of dark energy into his left hand as the person that he held looked up at me. To my surprise, it was Serena, slightly beaten up, as if from battle. As she looked up at me, Father continued, "Save someone that you know and love so dearly." I took a step back with my right foot as I charged a powerful amount of energy into my right hand, while I yelled, "You ungrateful bastard!" A booming voice from before came back and calmly said, "Fighting angry, tough, and bold is worth a handful of gold, but fighting peaceful, valiant, and true is worth far more than even you." "Choose," Callius yelled, "or you'll lose both no matter what." Grandpa jolted over and jumped as he pulled his left fist back to strike me. However, he was thwarted off by my left wing, the feathers slicing the man in several areas. I stood there for a few seconds, pondering about what the voice said, while I had fully charged my energy blast as much as I could get it, which was starting to burn my own hand. No, I thought. I have to save her. I have to save Serena. Her life is of great importance to me. But if I save her, billions of innocent lives will be lost. I don't want to lose her. Not to Father. I then remembered what Nanye had told me. That which is not worth anything is worth of great importance. Which led me to one conclusion. Father grasped Earth with his right hand and said, "Guess neither one is important to you then. Have fun living with that on your conscience."
No!
I shouted as I used the vanish technique. I then swung my right hand forward and yelled,
I'll murder you, D-Minion!
I shot the immense lethal surge of energy at him. It's slightly greater in size than the man, while I yelled,
Zenkai!
The blast I created, a powerful technique in my world, was made of pitch black energy. It had a small amount of white energy in the center of the surge, along with blood red strips of lightning sparking around the strike. No one I knew had used it before on an actual enemy, but I had been training for it. It was my first try, and it was quite easier than what I thought. Just as the surge struck Father, my vanish technique went out, and he was blown away from the blast, completely obliterated. After a few seconds, I stopped the surge of energy and lowered my right hand, while starting to pant for my great loss of power. At the same time, Callius glanced back at where Father was blown away. Then he looked over at me in fright as he released the energy he had gathered and let go of Serena's shirt. A sphere of energy that looked like Earth fell from where it was held, completely unharmed, and disappeared into the shadows. Afterwards, Callius, Grandpa, and Serena disappeared into the shadows as well. The entire area then was just enclosed into darkness. The booming voice came again and said, "Your task is complete. Now proceed to your next meet." Still thinking of Father, I said,
Worthless piece of shit!
I took in a few deep breaths and said,
I'll see you in hell.
A doorway opened in front of me that led back out onto the walkway inside the mountain, while I stood myself up straight and fixed my glasses. Once I stepped out, I felt the immense heat from the magma as the open path behind me slammed shut. Shortly afterwards, the stalagmites behind me crumbled into a pile of rocks, which I found to be a bit strange. I looked back at the rubble just as the mountain rumbled again, the magma raising up until it was just able to cover the path between me and the rocks. I didn't understand what was going on, but I guessed it didn't matter. All I knew was that I was to continue forward. After the path was destroyed, I shook my head and turned to motion up the walkway to the next door with a translucent yellow wall of energy. I stopped at the second trial door and just waited for the unknown voice to speak, which said, "Before you can proceed, you must service my every need." The wall flashed, and the voice said, "You can stand alone, or you can stand as one. Either way, bring the corruption to none." The door turned to a translucent black, and I looked up as it opened to show another dark and shadowy area. I walked through the doorway and once again heard the door slam shut behind me. The area slowly appeared to me as a grassy meadow, as if I was back on Bodor. The air was crisp, cool, and clear, and the wind was blowing gently to the southeast towards our star, Zaec. I looked around to see some white roses in random areas, and could see that this place was endless. Not even mountains or cities were up high in the far distance. Just as I turned around to completely examine the area, I saw three people that I knew very well: Serena, Wolf, and Bunny. The three of them stood calmly, with their legs together and their arms placed behind them. After noticing the group, Wolf asked, "Though you may think that your true love is Serena and Endelment, What if I were to tell you otherwise? I walked up to them to stand about 2 feet away as Bunny chuckled. Then she said, "You love Serena because she can resist you, unlike some of the women that you know. However," Serena smiled and said, "you love Wolf because she's always with you, kind and loyal, even though she doesn't have to be." After that, Wolf added, "But you love Bunny because you raised her to be a great and beautiful woman that knows how to take care of herself." I knew something was up again, just like the last time. They were not themselves. Yet even though they weren't, I looked between them and said,
There's more to it than that. I love my wife because she has a pure soul, one that I wish to keep pure as long as I live. Someone like her is more beautiful than anyone in the whole galaxy could ever hope for or to be. She's more beautiful than anyone in mind, body, and spirit put together. So shut up and deal with it.
"You're so full of shit, Endelment," Bunny happily barked. "Just admit it. You only love Serena because of her body, just like every other guy."
That's bullshit and you know it.
I barked as I took a step towards her.
Besides, that's more than what I can say about you. You just want to have relations with me because that's what I did with Wolf when I was 17 years old. However, that's not how it happened. Wolf came onto me, and I didn't know what to do at the time to stop her. So don't stand there and make it look as though I had something to do with it.
I then raised my voice and yelled,
You're always being a bitch about this, and that's what pisses me off about you. That's why I don't love you as much as either Wolf or Serena.
Bunny grew very upset while she started to cry and said, How can you say that?" Serena turned and held Bunny in her arms as the Alicans cried heavily, while Wolf looked at me with an angry expression and said, "Some father you are. You can't even see the simplest thing in your own daughter."
She's not my daughter,
I yelled as I turned to Wolf.
She's not even your daughter. You just found her abandoned and felt sorry for her, and then you begged me to help raise her. So why don't you two get a reality check and grow the fuck up?
Serena moved Bunny to let Wolf hold her. Then she quickly turned and slapped me across the face with her right hand very hard. Once done, she yelled, "What makes you think that they need to grow up? You want to do something about life, yet you can't even handle your own. You say people need to handle their own problems when you don't even think to lift a finger on your own. So now who needs to grow the fuck up, Shero?" I just stared at Serena, surprised. She was definitely not the Serena I knew. No matter how mad Serena was, she never struck me with full hatred in her emotions. It felt cold. Nearly to the point where I could forget everything that we had been through together and just strike back at her with all my might. I hated that feeling. It hurt. It hurt even worse than my scars did before. It didn't even feel like something that any normal person should feel. It almost made me cry. Even though she wasn't the real Serena, I still didn't want to harm her. It truly hurt. Stunned from the slap, I looked over at Serena while she lowered her voice and said, "Now, Endelment, you not only have to apologize to each of us, but you have to explain yourself. What do you want, and for what good reason?" I stood there for a few seconds, thinking about what this trial was all about. Then I realized it. It wasn't about them. It was really about me. My problem was that I wanted things to be at peace, but I didn't want to have anything to do with it. That included my relations with my friends and family. The corruption that needed to be fixed was me. While in my abyss form, I calmed down and looked over at Serena and asked, "You want me to choose, even though you know that I'm still a bit immature and may very well destroy all of what was given?" Serena became confused as she said, "Well, yeah. Why?" I gave a light smile and chuckled, then replied,
Very well then.
I turned and walked over to Bunny, with Wolf letting go of her, stepping away as she watched me carefully. Bunny turned to face me, confused, as she stood slightly frightened. I wrapped my arms around her, while raising my right hand up to place her head gently onto my chest. She gasped in surprise. Then she wrapped her arms around me as we closed our eyes. I lowered my head slightly and softly said,
Bunny, I know that it's not really you, but I must confess. You and all of my friends have shown me that I can be a little like my father sometimes, even though I thought I was rid of him. I know what needs to be done when I leave this place, but I'll say it now. I'm sorry for what I've done to you, and I hope that we can still live as a family. I will never turn my back on you or Wolf when you need me, just as I promised Serena. What I want is peace. Not for myself, but for you and everyone else. And that's more than what anyone else could possibly say to you with their deepest and strongest emotions.
We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then Bunny moved to whisper up at me and said, "Thank you, Papa." In surprise, I opened my eyes and moved to try to look down at Bunny. However, I found I was back in darkness again, alone. Along with that, the doorway for me to proceed through was open. I looked around, trying to find Bunny, but I couldn't see anything. After I walked through the doorway, it slammed shut behind me again and the magma rose, while the doorway crumbled once more. I headed up to the third trial doorway that had a blue wave of energy, where oddly enough the voice didn't say anything when I approached it. However, I didn't care. I just waited for the door to flash and signify who I was. Once it flashed, the booming voice said, "Make rise what you need to control, and may it all well be harnessed deep within your soul." The door turned translucent black, but it didn't open. In fact, it just formed into a black metal wall that just stood against me. It held its ground as the voice stayed silent, while nothing around me changed, which I started to become confused from. Yet after a moment, I randomly changed out of my abyss form. I glanced around at the mountain and myself, then turned back towards the doorway. The mountain rumbled again, and the magma started to rise slowly, which I turned back to face down the walkway as I asked, "What the hell's going on?" In fear, I watched the magma rise until it reached about a quarter of the way up the path towards me. I knew I couldn't use my powers, but then I thought, I can't use my own, but I can use Abyss. But how? It only worked when... I took a few seconds to realize something, then said to myself, my anger. It really does work with my anger. I clenched my right hand into a fist and looked back at the magma as it reached halfway up the path. I grew angry by just thinking of Father. All he's done that I never wanted to see, giving me more than enough to channel my dark powers. Immediately, my body changed back to its vile form, with my aura spiking up again, as I had nothing but rage and insanity flowing through my mind. That actually made me smile. Somehow, I had forgotten myself and just stood there for about 10 seconds, with a sadistic smile on my face. Then in my deeper and vicious tone, I said,
I'm starting to like this power.
I then looked at my right hand as I raised it up to my eye level and continued,
I'm going to enjoy this.
I clenched my hand into a fist and slammed it down into the walkway. where I was able to freeze the entire lake of magma into a solid rock floor. I then ripped my fist out from the walkway, pulling out a handful of rubble as I stood myself up. I changed the rubble in my hand into a small, simple double-edged sword that I held backhanded, with my own blood dripping from the entire blade. However, instead of the color of my blood being red, it was black. I gave a sinister chuckle as I turned back towards the doorway, which was still blocking my path. I swung the sword around to have the blade aimed at the metal wall, then lunged forward to stab it with full force. I plunged the sword halfway deep into the wall, then turned my hand around to grab the hilt backhanded. In doing so, I quickly turned myself around and violently pulled the sword out, shattering the wall behind me like glass. With the wall gone, I threw the sword up and turned back to head up the walkway. When I passed, the sword fell and stabbed into the ground. Spikes crumbled apart and crushed the sword as the floor became liquid hot magma again, rising until it reached the crumbled doorway behind me. Just as I reached the fourth doorway, I raised my right hand up to aim my palm out at the door, then charged a large amount of dark energy for a blast. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I was done with the place and wanted to get back home to kill Father. Kill the demonion. When I raised my hand up, the booming voice was about to say something, but I shot my blast of energy at the entire doorway and blew it into nothing, not even dust. I lowered my right hand back down as I continued onwards and said,
I'm through playing games. Whoever this Surfric guy is, he better prepare himself.
Walked up to the final doorway, and the golden flashing markings did the same thing that the first doorway did. Then the booming voice said, You have proven yourself worthy, gained my respect, and my powers. Now you must gain my knowledge. The markings around the doorway went black, then the doors slowly opened outward to reveal yet another blackened area as the voice said, Come forth, Endelment. Once you've understood my past, you shall return to the entrance of my forgotten tomb. I walked through and stopped when I cleared the entrance, then waited for the doors to slam shut. Oddly enough, they didn't slam shut, just slowly closed behind me. The place stayed black, and the booming voice said, Come closer, young one. I took 4 steps forward and suddenly stopped, hearing and feeling loud, earth-rumbling footsteps that sounded like something very large was slowly nearing. I also saw a pair of bright, golden evil eyes shining through the darkness, aimed at me. As the footsteps came closer, the shine on the eyes slowly faded to reveal 2 black eyes with golden pupils dilated like snake eyes. Then a face slowly appeared with them. With that, an entire body stepped forward and revealed itself, as if stepping out of the shadows that concealed it. When I saw this person, it scared the crap out of me. So much that I accidentally changed back into my normal form. I looked up at the person in fear and bent my wolf ears down and back as some of my bones shivered, with my jaw dropping a bit in surprise. What I saw that scared me was a giant black-scaled dragon, who towered 5 stories tall and had massive muscles bulging from its body. The dragon walked on all 4s and had 2 large scaly wings on its back, with each wing able to stretch out about 2 times bigger than its own body. It too had bone-like spikes, each golden, that jutted out of its joints, and had 4 horns on the back of its head that just spiked straight back about 3 feet. Its claws, however, were black, with large blood stains on each of them. Just as the dragon revealed itself, it laid down about 20 feet away from me and curled its large, long tail around itself to its left side. The dragon flapped its wings once to stretch them, blowing a massive gust of wind towards me, then folded them behind itself. It slowly bowed its head at me once, then raised itself up and said, "Hello there, young one. I had believed that you would never come. But in much surprise, you stand before me. Thank you. I am the King of Darkness and ruler of Abyss, Zaec Alanu. I have been imprisoned here ever since my ill-fated bout with my apprentice Shadow." I looked at the dragon, surprised as my ears popped up, and asked, "You knew Shadow?" The dragon gave a nobleman's nod, then placed his front right arm over his left and said, "Take a seat, young one, and I shall teach you of my horrid tale. The forgotten tale as Zaec Alanu." I sat down with my legs crossed, my hands placed behind me to brace myself up, feeling a little more comfortable around the beast, knowing it wasn't going to attack me, though it still shocked me that it existed. A great master to many of his followers and in the dark arts of Abyss, Zaec was one of the greatest and most powerful gods in his time. He even matched both his brother with his Illum arts of bliss and Hegu at their best. Sometimes, Zaec even won their fights. However, Zaec had a prediction that he believed was of his own demise. So, in his fear of being removed from his own realm, he called forth one of his many apprentices to further learn of his powers and gain control of all that he knew. The one that he had believed would most likely be fitted to rule his post once he was rid of his life. The one that he spoke of was none other than Shadow, the black nine-tailed fox. Shadow was far greater and more powerful than any student Zaec had ever taught. He was truly amazing in his master's eyes. However, Shadow was only interested in learning about Abyss in order to rule it and all others. And so, Shadow did everything in his abilities to rise above the rest and claim what he thought was rightfully his. But he only got there because he cheated his way through all of his teachings. However, Zaec did not realize this. He only saw an honor student and a courageous warrior that longed for power and pride. And even when Shadow's sister, Light, came forth and told Zaec of the horrible truth about Shadow, Zaec did not listen. He did not believe that Light could prove to him what Shadow really was. A deceiver. Several millenniums passed, and Shadow had grown into a fine and powerful creature of darkness. He even fought and killed one of his best friends to achieve his rightful place as his master's most honored student. Yet as time grew, Shadow started to drift away from his master, wanting to prove himself in both the realm of gods and in the realm of mortals how fearsome he was. And as he drifted further and further away, Zaec's prediction kept repeating itself more and more. He continued to ignore it, thinking that it was nothing more than a bad dream. It frightened and angered Zaec that he may have to remove his place as master, letting his teachings just follow his students as they grew with his knowledge and powers throughout their lives. But that also just edged him forward into teaching everything he knew about Abyss to his honor student, even if it would cost him his life. Then, the day finally came. Just halfway into his training, Shadow, in anger and in his foolish pride, stood against his master, Zaec, and challenged him for the title of King of Darkness. Shadow believed that he was far more superior than Zaec in every way, and wished nothing more than to prove it by destroying Zaec with his very own powers. It was a vicious and brutal standoff between the two. Both nearly ripped the realm of gods apart, with their awesome might. Yet it didn't last. Not long after their fight began, Shadow, his body beaten, torn to shreds, crippled, and nearly broken by Surfik's might, was forced to kneel before his master. However, Shadow wasn't the one to fall so easily. In fear of losing his life, Shadow used one of Surfik's own incantations to imprison his master within his own home, making it so he could never leave its confines. The seal Shadow used was of his own creation, one that he never thought could ever be broken. Because even Shadow believed that the legend could never come true. He sealed Surfik away and made it so only the Endelment, the god among mortals, was the only one who could open it. Once sealed away, Surfik spent the rest of his life patiently waiting in his home, hoping every now and then for the Endelment to reveal itself to him, so he may carry out his teachings to someone who was truly worthy, to someone he knew he could trust. After the long story, I asked, "So Shadow's real name is just that? Shadow?" "Yes," Surfik replied. "When he imprisoned me here, he took my name, Alanu, and title, King of Darkness, as a means to prove his almighty and dark powers. I may have been trapped, but I still know what goes on in darkness. However, I had hoped that my brother Wardrick would have stopped him, or even his own sister Light would have done something." With that, Light called out in my head, "I did! Well, I tried anyways." My ears twitched, and I looked around thinking that Light was somewhere around me. But of course, I found nothing. As I turned back to face Surfik, he said, "What troubles you, young one?" "My lord." "Yeah?" I asked. "I need to talk to Surfik. Can you speak for me?" Surfik chuckled, then said, "Do not worry, child. I can hear you." Light pitifully laughed, feeling stupid, then said, "Hello, Lord Surfik. Nice to finally meet you again." The dragon turned and bowed his head for her, then said, "Nice to hear your voice for a second time, Light. I hope my brother has taught you well." "Very well, Lord Surfik." "Please, Light, you may just call me by my name." "Oh, yes, yes, Surfik. Forgive me. I'm just so excited to see you again. I just respect you so much. Too bad my idiot brother wasn't as respectful as everyone else was." The dragon chuckled at that, then aimed his attention to me and said, "To let you know, young one, your last test was to see how respectful you were in your new form of power to those around you. But it seems as though the doorway was blown to pieces. However, I'm neither mad nor disappointed. In fact, I'm impressed. No one, not even Shadow, could destroy a trial door that I've put up to test someone's skills." "Oh, I'm so sorry, Surfik," Light said. "I wish I could have stopped my brother earlier and kept him from sealing you here." His focus on Light again, Surfik responded, "Calm yourself, young one. You've done nothing wrong. As long as you stand tall, Shadow can never rule any land as the evil being that he is." Yeah, right. Nothing wrong." Looking confused, Surfik asked, "Something wrong, child?" Light was silent. Then I looked to the dragon and said, "I think she's hiding from us now." The dragon smiled as he shook his head, then said to me, "Very well then." As quiet as she could, but hardly in a whisper, Light angrily said, "Don't you dare tell Wardrick I'm here. there's no way I can face him now after all this. With it just Zaec and me now, the dragon said, "If you haven't noticed, young one, those who have Abyss have only a fake version, given to them by Shadow himself. Along with that, the powers of Darkness and Abyss cannot be trained beyond their original status, as I'm sure the same thing is with Illum and Bliss. But as the Endelment, they are only meant for you to understand how to control your true powers. They are not meant for you to use in actual combat. Your dark powers help tame the wild warrior within you, while your light powers help to keep you focused within your battles." Though I was still unsure of being that dumbass rumor, I said, "Of course, Lord Zaec. However, once you've figured how to control your true powers, along with what is to be expected, your abilities in either Abyss or Bliss can be used at will without the means of change. Remember that." I nodded my head in compliance, then stood up and brushed myself off as the dragon continued, "As you leave, take my soul with you." I looked up at him, confused, while he continued, "I have been tied down in this realm for far too long. I wish to break free of its cruelty and bring forth the coming of your world's legend, to rid of your realm's unworthy beings of life." "You sure?" Zaec stood himself up as he looked down at me and said, "My soul shall grant you all of my dark powers and intelligence. You will be far more powerful than anyone that has been previously granted my powers from Shadow. Along with that, I shall accompany and guide you throughout your tale in any way I can." Zaec's body completely changed into a small sphere of energy that looked just like Shadow's soul, but it was slightly bigger and had a couple of spikes that swirled around it. The sphere then floated down towards me, slowly fused itself into my body. Shockingly, my energy capacity increased about twice as much from what it was before, and increased my strength and agility by half. At first, it kinda stung from the sudden growth, but then I was able to settle myself with a few deep breaths. Okay then. I looked around the room that was of darkness, then asked, "How do I get out of here?" "Simple," Zaec replied in my head. "Just meditate as you use your powers to transmit your energy back to the entrance of the cave." "Like teleportation? That's going to be a little hard to do without using my normal powers." Zaec laughed for a bit, then said, "They all say that on the first try." I closed my eyes and tried as hard as I could to concentrate, envisioning myself standing back outside the cavern in the realm of gods. Not long after that, I heard a woman's voice yelling at me. This concludes the reading of chapter 28. Thank you all for watching and listening. If you like what you've seen and heard, there will be a link to my physical works in the description below. With that being said, stay safe, take care, and we'll see you again next week, reading chapter 29.